Alright guys, so we're here with Canon's Alex Sachs, and we're here to talk about the new Canon XF camera, the XF605. So Alex, how are you doing today?
Doing great. How are you?
Doing so good. We're excited to hear about this camera and kind of get the features and specs on it. So let's just get right into it. And where does this 605 kind of fall in the XF lineup?
So it's pretty exciting actually. It's a really powerful new camera. We have our XF705, which is our top of the line camera, and the 605 sits just underneath that and between the 705 and the XF405. So it's a little bit smaller and more lightweight than the 705, and a little more has a little more horsepower, a little more feature sets than the XF405. So it sits right between kind of our top of the line and our mid-level of the line, but it's an extremely powerful camera. It's borrowing some things from our 705, and it's also borrowing some things from our C70, which is our RF cinema camera that we introduced last year. So it's got some really cool features inside of it. A lot of things borrowed from the 705, but much lighter, a little bit easier to use, but also some things that the 705 doesn't have.
That's awesome. So let's kind of elaborate on that. So the 705, what types of things is it incorporating, and what things is it bringing to the table that's new?
So the 705 was our first pro video camera that has a larger sensor. So it has a 1-inch sensor in it. And what that does is that gives you a little bit more of that shallow depth of field that you get from the our Super 35 series cameras and even our full frame products. Allows you to separate the subject from the background. So traditionally our pro video cameras had smaller sensors than the Super 35. So we took a step forward and closer to that larger sensor and added the 1-inch into it. So gives you a little bit better low light performance, gives you a little bit more of that shallow depth of field, a little bit more of that cinematic image that a lot of people look for in the pro video camera. And what's really cool about it is it kind of matches seamlessly with our Cinema Series products. So if you're somebody who's using our C500 Mark II or our C300 and you're used to those log features and you're used to that kind of shallow depth of field, this camera will fit perfectly into that workflow. So if you're looking for something that's a little bit more easy to use but also has some of these new features from the 705, including our 12G SDI and some of the other things like eye autofocus and intelligent tracking, things like that. We've incorporated that into here. So, you know, a lot of people who maybe shoot weddings or corporate or ENG broadcast style will really love this product as like their main camera, but also could use it as a supplementary camera to large sensor products as well.
So I know you said it's kind of the same form factor as the 705. You said maybe it's a little smaller, or how does it compare with the form factor?
Yeah, it's still that same traditional pro video style camera that you're gonna hold with like either your right or your left hand, and then have your other hand kind of supporting it with the flip out video screen. But it's a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter than our 705. So the 705 is really our flagship pro video camera. This one's a little bit lighter, a little bit easier to handle, but is still just as powerful in a lot of ways, including that it has that 1-inch sensor. It has a lot of the features that the 705 has, including 422 10-bit color. It's UHD up to 60 frames and Full HD up to 120 frames. It's got this new Digic DV7 processor in it, which is allowing all of these kind of new features that it has, like the 12G SDI, like the 422 10-bit. It has eye detection autofocus, which is something brand new for a pro video camera, which is really cool, especially if you're doing interviews or any kind of thing where walk and talks where you really want that eye in focus and not just the face detection, which is what we've had on most of our pro video cameras and even in cinema cameras. So it's really a big step forward and packs a lot of the power that the 705 has in a smaller and lighter body.
Great. So I know the 705 had a 15 times zoom fixed lens. Is that the same lens that's on the 605, or is there any differences between those?
So it has a 4K 15x zoom inside of it. It's an L series lens, so it's got those coatings that you're used to from our lenses on our mirrorless and DSLR side. And what's really amazing about this camera is it has a 4K sensor. So it's 15x when you're shooting in 4K, But when you go to HD, it actually will start zooming past what the lens is capable of and push in onto the sensor. So it gives you that extended range when you're shooting in HD.
Awesome. So you talked a little bit about the autofocus performance. Can you elaborate on that? Is that something that they gained from the C70? Can you just talk a little bit more about the autofocus?
Absolutely. So it is our first pro video camera that has eye detection autofocus, and it has our intelligent tracking, which basically means if you have someone looking at the camera and you have the autofocus engaged and they turn and you start seeing the side of their head or the back of their head, and this is common for a lot of people, especially if you're doing dancing or someone's moving, the autofocus will actually continue and hold on the person's head and face, and then when they turn around and they can engage that face and that eye again, the autofocus will kick back in. So it's pretty amazing the power that this camera has, and it's really because of that Digic DV7 processor.
So what's like the low light capability in the 605?
So this is actually one of the most low light sensitive pro video cameras that we've got, and it's really due to that 1-inch sensor and that Digic DV7 processor. So you can now push the gain even further in this camera and really start producing images that you couldn't do in low light. So reduce noise a little bit, again, because of that processor and because of that larger sensor. So for people who are looking to push the camera a little bit further than they're used to with pro video, this one's going to be our best performing low light pro video camera that we have.
That's great. So let's talk a little bit about the recording capabilities in this camera. What's the frame rate, the resolution, stuff like that? What can this camera do?
So what's exciting is this camera can actually do a lot. Just right off the bat at the highest level, it can do 422 10-bit in UHD, in 4K UHD. So you have a very capable high resolution camera. It can do up to 60 frames per second. And when you're in full HD, you can do up to 120 frames per second. But what's so interesting and exciting about this camera is that you can do multiple flavors of codecs and resolutions to the dual SD card slots. So the camera has 2 SD card slots, and you can do kind of a combination of different recording formats and resolutions to one card and then a different one to another card. So there's a whole bunch of things you can do. You can do 4K to one slot, you can do 2K to a second slot. So if you're someone who's looking to maybe master the show in 4K, but you only want to edit in 2K, and that's really what your master is going to be for now, but later you may want to go back to the 4K. That's a great option. You can do proxy recording, which is something that I love doing, and a lot of editors are really, and productions are starting to use a lot more, which is basically shooting at the highest quality the camera can shoot, and then the exact same file, but in a much lower bit rate, so that the editing system isn't taxed as much, specifically when you're shooting in like H.265 or something that's a codec that's very processor intensive on the computer. So what you can do is you can record 2 formats of the file and edit on the smaller size one, and then reconnect to the larger file later when you are going to color correct or master and finish. So the camera is really capable of doing several different things, and again, it's really due to that brand new Digic DV7 processor.
So let's talk about the streaming capabilities in this camera.
Absolutely. So there's some new functionality in this camera. We actually have a built-in Wi-Fi and a USB-C plug directly in the camera, so you can actually connect directly to your cell phone. So either through Wi-Fi or directly with that USB-C plug. And we'll have a brand new app that's will allow you to basically use the cellular capabilities of the phone to send out files directly to another place. So it's mostly for people who are going to be doing like news gathering, who want to be able to send those files directly to your editor that's in another location. You can go directly USB-C from the camera to the computer and even use it as a webcam. So a lot of people who have used our EOS utility webcam software, where you can just, instead of needing extra pieces, you can plug the camera directly into the computer and start using your camera as your webcam. You can do that with this camera. So not only is it a great product for using out in the field, it's also something that you can use directly to improve the quality of your webcam for if you're doing just talking head videos or presentations or even high quality Zoom recordings.
That's perfect. We've had a lot of, customers come in with that need that are trying to stream either like their sporting event or their church service. So I feel like this camera would be awesome for that. So let's kind of get into that. Who's kind of the user that would want this camera?
So there's a lot of different people who would want this specific camera or just a pro video camera in general, depending on what they're looking for. It's somewhat easier to use than a camera with an interchangeable lens mount. So if you are something like a house of worship or a church streaming production, you can kind of hand the camera off to volunteers. We know that that's something that happens a lot of times. People who are just looking for someone to help with the camera, but maybe they don't have a ton of professional experience. This is something that's kind of very easy to use, especially with the autofocus and the USB-C plug for the streaming or just HDMI or SDI. So, it's perfect for house of worship. It's perfect for ENG news style coverage. I really think this would be a great wedding camera if someone who films weddings, and as a supplementary camera to maybe a larger sensor product like our C500 or C300 or C70. So, I think there's a lot of different people that would really benefit from the use of this camera, especially because of all the different recording capabilities. Earlier, when you asked me about some of the codecs in it, it does both H.264 and H.265. H.265 is kind of a futuristic codec. A lot of people are supporting it now, especially third-party editing systems, but it's still kind of a new codec. So we've still got that traditional H.264, which is something that everyone basically uses and can edit right now. So you've got a product that can kind of span using it now, and also something that in several years when H.265 becomes more readily used. And the reason you'd even want to consider H.265 is because it allows you to record more footage on your card. It kind of reduces the data file size of that 4K file, so you can do longer 4K recordings on traditional SD cards. So it's a lower data rate without losing any of that information. And the camera does XF605, which is Canon's format, but also MP4, and you can even do them simultaneously. So it's kind of a camera for everyone. And it's not even a camera that is so futuristic thinking that you can't use some of the features on it. It's got kind of things you can use now and things where it's going to go later. So yeah, I really think it's something for someone who's looking for an ease of use camera with a lot of capabilities inside of it. And also people who are doing high level broadcasts, because that 12G SDI is something that broadcasters are looking for. And essentially why that's important is because you can put out a 4K signal with one SDI cable. So making it very simple for 4K broadcasters to get that 4K signal with one cable. The camera also supports 2 versions of HDR production, which again is not for everyone, but definitely if you're someone who's looking to do something like that, you can do PQ and HLG, which are 2 formats for HDR production. So again, the camera is kind of great for people who don't maybe use pro video cameras a lot, and people who really are demanding high level feature sets.
Awesome. So there's a pretty broad range of people that can end up using this camera. That's awesome. So you mentioned a little bit about the SDI out. So what's kind of the difference between, or the benefits of the SDI out versus an HDMI?
There's several benefits to the SDI. It's a locking plug, so when you plug it in and you twist it, it's locked into your camera. Whereas HDMI it's really powerful and useful for some accessories, but you can knock the plug sometimes and it can kind of pop out. And it's really not meant for kind of running long cables with it. It's kind of meant for connecting maybe a local monitor or recorder very close by. The 12G is really, really powerful in that it sends that signal out of the SDI with one single cable. And it's something you can do with HDMI, but in the broadcast world and people who are looking for that real solid plug, HDMI is just usually something they don't want to use, but it really depends on what you're doing. So we have both ports on there, so that way professional level people who want to use the SDI can use it, and then if someone has an accessory that has HDMI, they can use that as well. So it's really, again, a camera for high-level productions and even entry-level. I wouldn't say entry level because it is still a very powerful camera, but it's very easy to use. So even if you are considering a pro video camera for your, this is maybe your first purchase or your second purchase, I still think this is a camera that you should consider.
All right, so I know you touched a little bit about the wireless functionality. Can you kind of expand on that and how it functions in the XF605?
Yeah, I mean, it's got built-in Wi-Fi, so we have a browser remote for the camera, which is actually really cool. It allows you to start and stop the camera and change settings inside of it. So if you're someone who is recording themselves and you just want kind of a wireless remote, or if you're somebody who is maybe using a gimbal or a Steadicam and you need somebody to kind of change the settings or engage NDs or anything like that. So it has that capability built in. You don't need any additional hardware pieces for it. So if you have a phone, which everyone does, and you have this camera, you basically have a wireless video connection. It's not really meant to be used as a wireless video other than just checking the framing and seeing how things are looking. It's really meant to be a wireless remote control for the camera. But again, if you plug the phone directly into it or use this Wi-Fi remote that we talked about, it has this brand new function where you can send those clips out directly to another location. So for people who are looking to edit things kind of right away, and this is really a feature set that's used in journalism and broadcast news, this really gives you that added power that people need so they can deliver that footage right away. And they can start editing on it, within, a much faster time than it would take to maybe put it onto like a Dropbox link or, send out a hard drive or something like that. So the camera's very capable in terms of Wi-Fi and direct connection to a cell phone.
Awesome. So we've kind of gone through kind of the main functions of the camera. Is there any other notable features that you'd like to mention?
Yes, so it has touch control, which is something that we added to the C70 camera. It's a brand new way to kind of control the main functions of your of the camera right on the main display screen. So it's a really cool way to just get at some of those really important things, the white balance, the shutter, the things that you're using often. We've incorporated that from the C70 into this XF605, but the thing we actually added that you can't do on the C70 is the full internal menu is completely touchscreen. So now you can actually go through individual menu items and still use your finger right on the screen. So very, very cool thing to have, very functional. Also, when you're doing playback on the camera, you can kind of scrub through the clips just by touching and then dragging your finger across. So just those things you're used to from like an iPhone, being able to kind of jump forward 10 seconds, back 10 seconds. It's just Canon always adds these things that kind of take the product a step forward and just make it a little bit more functional on set, a little bit nicer, a little bit more, on set friendly when you're going. So it just becomes one of those things where you're able to kind of switch functions very, very fast and seamlessly. So if something changes real quick, you're able to respond to it. There also is a brand new hot shoe on top of the camera that allows communication. It's not just for adding an accessory. So we've partnered with a third-party company to create 2 additional XLR inputs. So the camera has 2 built into the camera, but with this third-party product, you'll be able to have 4 full XLR inputs for your camera, which is just great, especially if you're shooting weddings or corporate functions where you just have to mic up a lot of different people. Just adds that additional functionality to the camera, and you don't even need cables or anything. So it's just a really elegant solution if you are requiring additional XLR ports on the camera. One of the other things that the camera has is user assignable buttons, and this is something that we've had on cinema and pro video products for a long time. But one thing that's new about this camera is you can do up to 100 different menu items, which is the most we've ever had on any camera that Canon's offered. So all sorts of different functions in the camera can be reassigned to the buttons on the outside of the product of the camera. So you have, if you want something very specific just with a 1-button push, that's something you can do right now. So again, just these little extra things that make your life on set that much easier.
Perfect. Well, we're excited about this new camera and excited that there's finally something in between the XF405 and the XF705. If you have any other questions about the features, the functionality, or even pricing and availability, you can visit us on our website at pictureline.com.